Welcome to the Octavius Gould Experience, and I'm your host, Octavius Gould. I am excited to bring to you episode 34 titled, Planning as a Leader. The purpose of this episode is to provide my audience with insight on one of the most important skills that leaders must develop. Planning is a process in which entrepreneurs or corporate leaders define their vision for the future and identify key business objectives. This includes establishing the sequence in which those objectives and even goals should be realized, which will ensure that the organization can also realize its vision. As an executive coach, I've had the privilege of developing corporate leaders as well as entrepreneurs for decades. One of the most common threads between the great ones is their ability to plan and execute on their plans. A typical day in the life of an entrepreneur or corporate leader in any organization or at any level can be extremely hectic and unpredictable. That's because there are always constant threats of having priorities dictated by internal or external interference. What do I mean? Internal interference are distractions occurring within your organization or business that hinders your focus. External interference are distractions or disruptive events happening outside of your organization, which are out of your control. With that said, the most effective and efficient leaders and entrepreneurs plan and prepare. This is why I was alarmed to read a few studies preparing for this episode, which highlighted that 47% of leaders in corporate America spend less than 1 day per month communicating their strategy. That reminds me of a quote by Tony Robbins. People don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. What's this planning thing all about in leadership? Planning is a function of corporate leadership or entrepreneurship, which involves setting clear organizational objectives and determining a viable course of action for achieving those objectives. Planning also requires that corporate leaders and entrepreneurs be aware of environmental conditions facing their organization and are capable of forecasting future conditions. It also requires that leaders and entrepreneurs develop into great decision makers. My friends, planning is a systematic process that should ensure that your strategy is adaptable and actionable. And there are several steps to this planning process. The process begins with what is called environmental scanning, which simply means that leaders and business owners must be aware of critical contingencies facing their organization in terms of 1, economic conditions, 2, their competitors, and 3, their customers. Leaders must then attempt to forecast future conditions. This is mission critical because these forecasts form the basis for that planning. Leaders must also establish objectives, which are statements of what needs to be achieved and the target dates for achieving those objectives. But that's not enough. It's important to identify alternative courses of action for achieving your objectives. And none of this is easy, which is why leadership should be reserved for professionals with the skills and core competencies to handle the role. In my opinion, too many organizations make the mistake of promoting individual contributors into leadership, but the success they achieve solo does not transfer to their team members. For example, new or bad leaders would stop here, while great leaders would continue to evaluate the various alternatives and then make decisions about the best course of action for achieving those objectives. It's at this point that they would formulate the necessary steps to ensure that the effective implementation of their plan is accomplished. Stay with me right here, because there are some good corporate and business entrepreneur leaders out there, but what differentiates the good from the great is that the great corporate leaders and entrepreneurs always execute on the implementation while involving others who are equally capable. Finally, leaders must have measurable milestones in place to allow them to evaluate the effectiveness of their plans. You just can't wing it. You must have your fingers always on the pulse using KPIs, key performance indicators, surveys, or even audits. These tools will actually guide you when it's time to take corrective action or you need to pivot. This reminds me of a time about a little over a decade ago when I was consulting for a startup in the sports industry. The company founder, who was also the CEO, had a great athletic background, but he did not possess business acumen. And that was understandable, since he had only been in the business world for about 4 years. This founder always talked about his plan, but did not listen to others well. Not to a CFO who was on contract, not to me, his business coach, and not even to his investors. Unfortunately, his inability to listen or be open to shared ideas prevented him from pivoting when his plan was failing to produce the forecasted results. What he failed to realize, my friends, was that he turned over so much power to his investors that they took over his company, fired him as CEO, and implemented many of the changes that others recommended, including mine. I learned valuable lessons from those investors, and they were hardcore in New York City about being willing to involve others, especially the ones who are smarter than you in the planning and execution stages. You must have heard the quote by Ken Blanchard, "None of us is as smart as all of us." I'll repeat that. None of us is as smart as all of us. Back to the planning discussion. There are a few different types of planning. There is strategic planning, and this involves the analyzation of the strengths and weaknesses of your organization, as well as competitive opportunities and threats. You may have heard this referred to as a SWOT analysis, SWOT. And a SWOT analysis will guide corporate leaders as well as business owners in determining how to position their organization to compete effectively in their competitive business environment. When thinking about strategic planning, you want to think in terms of it being long-term, as in 3 years or more. And this is because strategic planning usually involves the entire organization, even if you are a small emerging business, and includes the formalization of objectives. Strategic planning is often based on a company's mission, which is its reason for existence. In my opinion, the C-suite within many organizations drop the ball by failing to allow top management within their company and organizations, even if they're a nonprofit, to be involved in the strategic planning. That's a big mistake. Next, you have tactical planning. This is planning that usually ranges from 1 to 3 years. And it's designed to develop defined means on how to implement the strategic plan. I actually recommend to my client companies that mid-level corporate leaders have a hand in their tactical planning. We must not forget operational planning. This planning, which should be factored in less than a year, is designed to develop specific action or specific action steps that support the strategic and tactical plans put in place by senior leadership or the C-suite, that being the CEO, CFO, CTO, COO, and Chief HR or Chief Human Resource Officer. In closing, it's important that corporate leaders as well as entrepreneurs commit to planning. To achieve sustainable success, there must always be a sound strategy. When organizations have long-term vision that senior leadership put into a coherent plan of action, which they effectively communicate as clear objectives, then and only then does an organization have a sound strategy. They will have a great strategy when the plan also takes advantage of unique capabilities to exploit exciting external opportunities. We call that market disruption. Like how Uber or Lyft disrupted the marketplace once controlled by yellow cabs. If there's one thing that I hope you all take away from this episode, It is that you must strive to become a strategic leader who plans well, involves others willingly, and implements a plan that all stakeholders can execute. This is vitally important because when correctly formulated and effectively communicated, a sound plan will provide everyone within your organization with a defined set of guidelines for their daily actions. My friends, if you covet compelling content on entrepreneurship or corporate leadership, please hit like, share, and subscribe to my podcast now so you can be alerted to future episodes. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next episode. Carpe diem.